It's easy to celebrate the victories and achievements of our late ancestors. Yet, voicing some of the darkest moments from the past might leave one with a lump in the throat. Past carries disturbing secrets, which even the time won't be able to conceal. Most horrific events in history will forever be engraved in people's minds and serve as painful reminders of senseless acts of humanity. 1. The Radium Girls. In the 1920s, they worked at a watch company painting the hours on the watches using radium, a radioactive element that glows in the dark. They did this with no PPE and weren't told radium is dangerous. Meanwhile, the chemists had full PPE and worked in a sealed environment. Worse, they were instructed to lick the tip of the brush to make a very fine point. Some of them would paint their nails or their teeth with it for fun when they went out at night. They would develop cancer whenever the paint touched, and many of them had such decay in their jaws that their mandibles had to be held on with bandages. 2. Magdalene asylums, also known as Magdalene laundries. Places of reform for women that didn't fit the idea of a good upstanding citizen. The most well-known ones were in Ireland. The women and girls were abused and mistreated by asylum staff, most of whom were nuns. Mass graves, selling these women's children to people in other countries, blocking any parental rights. There's apparently at least one movie coming out, a lot of stories about it, and so many people sharing stories from their mothers and grandmothers. I guess it's more well known than I first thought. 3. The Vipehome experiment. Sweden are mostly known as a not very scary country, with good and mostly accessible dental care. The Vipehome experiments were a series of human experiments where patients of Vipehome Hospital for the Intellectually Disabled in Lund, Sweden, were fed large amounts of sweets to provoke dental caries, 1945 to 1955. The experiments were sponsored both by the sugar industry and the dentist community in an effort to determine whether carbohydrates affected the formation of cavities. The experiments provided extensive knowledge about dental health and resulted in enough empirical data to link the intake of sugar to dental caries. 1. However, today they are considered to have violated the principles of medical ethics. Hey, you are institutionalized and suffering and powerless. Let's make your teeth rot out of your skull. For science. 4. The Children's Blizzard. It occurred in January 1888 on an unseasonably warm day. The weather was nice, and many school kids were tricked into not wearing coats or jackets to school, some only in short sleeves. While the kids were in class, the weather outside changed dramatically from warm and sunny at noon to dark and heavy like a thunderstorm, with heavy winds and visibility at 3 steps by 3 p.m. Children left school to go home and do their chores, this was in Minnesota, and were expected to milk the cows and do whatever else was involved in the family farm. But they got lost in the darkness and snow, and the wind, and many froze in their town, just yards from houses or other sources of refuge. 235 people, mostly children, perished. 5. The Ideal Maternity Home here in Canada. From the 1920s till the 1940s, they took in babies from unwed mothers and they were selling them especially to desperate Jewish families in New Jersey. Adoption was illegal in the U.S. back then. It was later discovered that the people who ran this business would starve the unmarketable babies by feeding them only molasses and water. The babies would last around 2 weeks on this diet. They put the corpses in wooden box often used for butter, and that's why the victims are called the butterbox babies. The boxes were either buried on the property or at sea or burned in the home furnace. The parents who gave their child to this maternity home would go back and see how their child is doing but were told the child has passed away, when in fact it had been sold to adopting parents. 6. In the U.S. it was common to do invasive surgery on infants without anesthesia until the mid-1980s. It was thought that newborns couldn't feel pain. 7. Margaret Beaufort, mother of Henry VII, father of Henry VIII. She was married off at age 12 to Edmund, 25, who was desperate to get her pregnant as quickly as he could. It was not unusual for members of the aristocracy to marry young. It was slightly more unusual, because of the risk to both mother and child, for them to get pregnant before the age of 14. Edmund passed away of plague while Margaret was pregnant. She was widowed and alone and pregnant during war. The birth was a very difficult one and would scar her forever. For a time they believed that she and her unborn child would perish. Not only was she very young, but she was also slight of stature and undeveloped for her age, so it's a wonder she even survived childbirth. It was so difficult for her that she never became pregnant again over the rest of her years, despite remarrying 2 more times.